Hey, garden nerds, we have a sponsor for this episode. True Leaf Market has been a supplier of exclusively non-GMO seeds since 1974. They offer a wide selection of seeds, many of which are heirloom and organic, for everything from vegetables to flowers, grains to herbs, and specialty seeds like really cool Asian varieties and lots of stuff like their supplies and seeds for growing microgreens and for sprouting. That's where they really shine. Their seed packets are affordable and are available in sizes for the home gardener all the way up to bulk wholesale. Visit trueleafmarket.com and use our promo code GTOTW10. That's for Garden Nerd Tip of the Week, GTOTW, and the number 10. All right, check it out. Now on with the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Garden Nerd Tip of the Week podcast, where garden nerds from around the world talk shop, share stories, and offer their favorite tip. I'm your host, Christy Wilhelmi. My guest this week is Nicky Schauder of Permaculture Gardens. She grows food with her husband, Dave, and their 6 children in Northern Virginia. She runs a program called Grow It Yourself Community and teaches online courses on permaculture. Nicky studied permaculture with Wayne Weisman and strives to educate suburban families how to provide food and medicinal plants for themselves through ecological gardening. Thanks for chatting with me, Nicky.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about you because we don't know each other yet. So let's start with your 40th of an acre. Where are you and what kind of garden do you work with?
Well, we recently moved from that 1/40th of an acre townhouse in August. We moved to a 3-acre farm in Leesburg.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it's still in Northern Virginia. And Northern Virginia is like, I guess, a suburb of Washington, D.C., if you were to call that whole area. And we're now in the mountains. So we used to garden in a tiny townhouse for, let's say, 7 years. We were there for 15, but halfway through, our kids had allergies, food allergies, and we couldn't figure out why they weren't growing the first 2. And so we decided we had to take things into our own hands and start growing some of the things at least ourselves, because we started buying organic and everything started getting more and more expensive, and more so now. So we started with tomatoes and we failed miserably. So, what we were doing, it was like just putting spaghetti on the wall. So it wasn't until my husband and I went on a bookstore date and we chanced upon a homesteading book. It was one from an English family, and the word permaculture was there, and we were interested in it. We went down the rabbit hole of permaculture and found out it was used to green the desert. And that really caught our attention, especially where you are from, Christy. I always have a heart for that because that was what really got us into it. Like, it could change the world. So it was used to green the deserts of Jordan and the lowest plateau in China. And I thought, well, if they can grow food there, then we can do it in our backyard. So we started learning more about it. We got certified, and then people started coming to us. But because we're a busy family, we're like, we better just, teach it online. And we started giving webinars, and we had to live it ourselves. So our backyard, 1/40th an acre, super shady yard covered by the big townhouse, produced for us 25%, at one point 25% of our fruits and veggies.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Intensive gardening, espaliered trees, understory fruiting trees like pawpaw, which are great in our climate here, which is zone 7, and rainy. We get 40 inches of rain.
Ooh.
So hardly any watering. Really, we were just channeling the water naturally into the yard, into the lettuce beds, and also. So that's how we started.
And so this 3-acre property now, are you able to grow everything or most of everything?
So exciting. We just walked around the property yesterday, my husband and I, and looked at the plans that we were doing. And we can't implement everything at once. So in permaculture, we're just trying to do zone 0. That was our first few months. Zone 1, which is the one closer to the house. And then now our production garden. So we have 8 beds. I think they're 12 by 4 each. They're pretty long. 8 beds. And we have in them growing Napa cabbages, a lot of the winter greens. So we have tree collards, which you guys can grow really well. And we were trying to experiment if they would survive here, because we want perennials in our beds.
Mhm.
We're growing experimental collards. We're growing spinach and lettuce and onions and shallots and garlic, celtis.
Oh,
So
Celtis. Yeah, Celtis is a new one that a lot of people haven't heard of, but it's an Asian like a celery lettuce combination kind of thing. Is that right?
yes, so it grows really well. But then we found out it's a little bitter. So we
Hmm.
put it in stir fries and it's still a little bitter. The bitterness doesn't go away. So I think, I mean, if you want your bitters in your diet, and we're still happy to get anything fresh. We just had cabbage I just stir fried cabbage for lunch. Um, yeah, so it's every day we get something from the garden. We still did in the townhouse, but more so now
Hmm.
with all the much more land.
That's wonderful. And are you keeping any animals, or will you have plans for animals on this property?
Absolutely. So chickens are coming in today. In fact,
Oh,
they were delayed in the post. So I have to go back to where here there's 10-minute drive in a little farm store, and I have to go back there after I talk to you and pick up our little baby chicks.
yay.
So yeah, it'll be a great it'll be a system, and more to come, orchards in the plan, and pathways, and lots of interesting things. A demo garden for small spaces to prove that you can grow in small spaces still. Yeah, so
That sounds wonderful. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the permaculture zones, can you explain that just really quickly?
absolutely. So zones, basically, unlike your USDA growing zones in permaculture are also called zones of use. So how frequently do you visit a specific area? And so this is not necessarily concentric to your home, but sometimes it is. Most often that's the case. It's what you would go out to put your herb garden right close to your home, because that's where your culinary herbs should be. And a little further on is your production garden. A little further away is your chicken coop. A little further away is your orchard. And the least frequently visited ones, that's like the wilderness, where you're just like rambling, or meditation spaces. Now, I always like to quote Bill Mollison, who's the founder of permaculture, at least the word. And he said, when you wake up in the morning and you put your fuzzy slippers on to get chives for your omelet, if you come back and your fuzzy slippers are wet, you've walked too far. So you didn't put your herb garden where you should have. You got your
Right.
slippers wet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you reached out to me because you were studying the effects of compost tea on edible crops. How did that all research and everything that you're doing begin?
Well, it began with a Google search that said, is aerated compost tea effective, or is it worth doing aerated compost tea? And if you do that search, you will get a lot of blogs that say no, it's not
Hmm.
worth your time, it's not the same effect. And it's not just a lot of blogs, but Sean Jadrin-Izek, he's an author, a permaculturalist, and he is actually, if I were to have a thesis advisor, that would be him. He's my extension agent that I consulted the day that I submitted my application. That's how like prepared I was. But he had said that there were actually, he did the study. He's very, very garden nerdy to the
Hmm.
max too. And he had done a study, and they said they didn't find any. Or he had seen somebody do a study, or heard somebody do a study, and they said they didn't find any evidence of it. But I was really interested because I found a study done by Koreans on the effects of aerated compost tea on soybean production.
Hmm.
And they were using not just vermicompost, but oat straw compost and medicinal herbs, Korean medicinal herb compost. And they had tested these three kinds of composts, aerated them, bubbled, meaning they would put them in a bubbler, in a water medium. So they would suspend the finished compost in a permeable bag over a water medium, run a pump to bubble and aerate that water medium. And now have to read again if they fed the molasses, because it's been a while since I read that.
Right. And that's the big difference in active aerated compost tea is two ingredients that are not in leachate or extract, which is you're putting foods in for the microbes to feed on and multiply, and you're using aeration to put bubbles in, and that's keeping oxygen in the environment so that you don't end up breeding anaerobic bacteria.
That is correct. That's absolutely right. And that's the aerobic bacteria that we are bubbling is the favored bacteria beneficial to our plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can put more of that in a spreadable medium like water, rather than in a compact like clump of soil, we could potentially extend, multiply the inoculation of this microbiome, this biology into our gardens, instead of having one direct space where you're just side dressing your garden with compost. And so in this Korean study, it was shown that not only did the roots and the plant of the soybean develop the most, actually, with the mix of all three, but that it spiked, that the growth, they measured, they even labeled all the bacteria that they were in the samples that they were growing. There's so much. And then after they did that, they looked at the trajectory of the life of the bacteria, of when were they alive. And there was a bell curve that spiked at day 3. And so common now for those who do use aerated compost tea would normally do it, bubble it for 2 days right before that spike happens. Because what you're hoping for is you're hoping that you'll get them, and then you'll spread them around your garden, and they will keep on multiplying a little bit more before they die out. And
interesting. Yeah, because when I learned about compost tea, I learned that 18 to 24 hours is the maximum that you want to brew for, because by then they've used up all the foods that are that you've input, and they start to die off at that point. But so I wonder if they're feeding additionally, like if they're adding foods through that process to make it last longer. But it still falls within the range of 2 days is really the
it does fall within, and it could have been that's maybe just a little bit there. I'm almost certain that I probably would not have written this unless they did feed it with something molasses. But I will double check for you.
You have to double check. All right. Well, we'll put that link in the show notes for this. And just for the sake of explaining the difference between leachate, compost tea, active aerated compost tea, and extract, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of what is leachate?
So leachate would be the drippings of, let's say, your worm bin, if you had a vermicomposting bin, or even just a compost bin, where it's all the juice that's in the bottom of the bin that you just open. Sometimes you'll have a spigot, open the spigot and let it out. Now, they could be puddling there for more than 12 hours and potentially harboring anaerobic bacteria.
Right.
And that's what we don't want, the pathogenic bacteria to be in our soil, because that could have, then it would increase the risk of soil-borne food, diseases, soil-borne diseases in your plants. So we don't want that to use that. Some people have successfully done it, used leachate. But I try not to do that.
Yeah, and I can tell you from personal experience, I have drained off the leachate from my worm bin, and without diluting it, which you are supposed to dilute anyway, if it smells like garbage, no, don't use it. Here's my story. I used it undiluted. It smelled awful. I poured it on my Swiss chard, and the next day, all of my Swiss chard was dead, limp, lifeless, completely dead.
God.
I was testing it on an extreme level.
I love that you tested it out.
Yeah. And I suppose that if I had diluted it, maybe the impact wouldn't have been so noticeable, but I was making a point.
Yeah.
Unintentionally.
You brought that up.
Yeah. And so then an extract is just when people take compost, put it in a mesh bag, put it in some water, and massage the bag to extract what microbes are in the compost out into the water, and maybe some nutrients that are in it. But if you're, a lot of people want to make compost tea or think that making compost tea is by soaking in a bucket of water for, a week or whatever. And that is going to breed, unless you're aerating it, that's going to breed anaerobic bacteria. And so it's not essential. It's not the best way of doing things. And it can, in fact, be harmful. Although there is some information out there about anaerobic bacteria being beneficial, like in the sense of bokashi. That's a fermented anaerobic process.
So that's a different kind of composting system.
Yeah.
Have you tried that yourself?
I have not, but I have friends who do bokashi, and at my community garden, they use a bokashi spray from a bottled solution, EM bokashi, you can buy that. And they spray that on the compost piles to keep them from smelling, which is interesting, is it not?
So it has it still smells. It's just a different fermented smell, like you would when you open your kimchi or your sauerkraut.
Right.
So I have done it, and it's anaerobic bacteria, but it's a 2-stage process. So that's first that one where it is anaerobic, and you're hopefully cultivating the probiotic, what it would be the biotic that would ferment that your media, all your organic matter. But then when you put it out, the second stage is you have to put it out and dig it up and dig it into your garden somehow. And then there's the aeration that hopefully nullifies any pathogenic stuff.
Right.
But the predominant is the beneficial probiotic, hopefully bacteria that's in bokashi.
Yeah. And so back to the extract for a second. If you are just putting a bag of compost into a bucket of water, you do want to aerate it before distributing it so that it kills off the anaerobic bacteria and helps bring in some, lets the aerobic bacteria start to form. But I'm a big fan of brewing compost tea with an aerator, it's a pump that shoots air through the water, and you get bubble. I mean, there's studies that even go to bubble size, like which bubble size is best. And I haven't really looked that deep into it, but it exists, So
yeah, and that's a legitimate concern, even with aerated compost tea. And this is Sean again emailing me. He said more recently there's been some concern about foodborne pathogens in compost tea, because he says the greatest risk comes from adding sugars or amendments to the teas. Right. So even that molasses stage, I think, that's where because it's sugar, that it might also feed the anaerobic bacteria. But I think as long as you're bubbling, you put it before you bubble, it should be good. But if you put it after you bubble, then you might, it might not do it the thing.
Yeah. And Dr. Elaine Ingham, who I learned compost tea from, she's not a fan of adding molasses for one reason or another. It's been so long, I can't remember exactly why, but she's big on foods and making sure there are enough foods in the compost tea so that the microbes don't die off. So I tend to brew for 18 to 24 hours and then distribute within 2 hours of brewing. So once you take the pump out, you have to distribute it. You can't just let it sit there for a while, right? Have you included, well, I have so many questions. I was just like, how much of your research, what does your research entail? Let's break it down. What are you doing?
Yeah. So I am mimicking the Korean research, except for the fact that I am going to be looking at nutrient density in 3 vegetables: kale, cabbage, and lettuce. And so from the way that they've done it is they have foliar sprayed the compost tea every week. So I'm going to do like a foliar spray and a root drench every week for the compost tea, and then I'm going to do it alongside an NPK application of the same. So from seedling stage. And this is where it's exciting, because as I'm learning more about plant physiology from someone named John Kempf, and you should have him here. He's a great, really in-depth into how photosynthesis, like there are 4 stages, and he has something called a plant pyramid. And like in the first stage, even for the plant, his main thing is, he has a very bold assertion that all plants can be free of disease and insects, as long as you've hit all their Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is his plant pyramid.
Uh-huh.
And so the first part is that plant physiology, if that plant physiology ladder is making sure that they do 100% photosynthesis. And why do I say that? Is that, so then I'm thinking, okay, if I see pests on my plants, I know that there's something missing there. They're not doing 100% of their photosynthesis. They're not going up that ladder. They're not optimally healthy. So I'm looking at my seedling trays now. I have several of them in the basement. And I see some trays with lots of flies in them. You know how when you start seedling trays and then your whole house is full of flies, it's on Zoom a lot? Okay.
Yeah.
That means there's something going on, as this is just from what I'm learning recently. So I may have more to say in the future, but this is, apart from what I'm learning, this is because they're not optimally healthy, even as seedlings.
Mhm.
And so I think it does make sense that Korean study started from from the start from germination. You are first, you are spraying. So that's my study. It would be foliar spray and root drenches every week from germination to in the ground
Maturity.
harvest. Yeah,
Oh,
maturity.
okay. And you already sort of answered this. I was going to ask what your initial findings are, but so you've seen that already. How have you been? Have you started the study? Or are you still in the preparation stage?
April 1st is when I start the study. I just got really excited.
Okay.
And I'd been emailing you for a while back too, like a year ago or so, about things. So I thought I might as well tell her about this one. But I am starting it on my own home stuff first, because the officers of the grant have to still come back to me and chat with me about the details and such. So I can't officially start till April 1st, but I'm just unofficially starting with my own seedlings.
Okay. And by the time this airs, it will be in April. So you'll have to post some updates when you
I'll
start
send you
seeing
some.
results. Yeah.
And then the end is I'm working with an organization called Bionutrient Institute, and they have the capability to measure the nutrient density of my plant. So they said that'd be great if I can send them samples, and any farmer, any home grower could do this if they wanted to for a fee. And I think they have like different tiers of involvement in that organization if you wanted to participate in their own citizen science researches. And one of them is like, how can we get like a spectrum of different grown crops, like say carrots from Walmart, carrots from Whole Foods, and see where do they fall in the spectrum of all the samples that we have in terms of nutrient density, so that we can sway the consumer in the end, like not buy according to how big it looks or shiny, but how nutrient dense the product actually is.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I've tended to shy away from speaking to nutrient density in organics because there hasn't really been a solid study that I can point to that shows that result. I talk about organics from omitting the pesticide load and the benefit to the environment. But once we get a study that I can really truly point to that is science-based and statistically outlined about the nutrient density improvements in organics, I look forward to seeing the results of that study, because then that's just like signed, sealed, delivered as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
and it already is. I think organics are already the way to go. We've already seen how changing the way we farm and the way we treat our soil makes a huge difference in carbon capture or expenditure. And so we need to make those changes anyway. So nutrient density is just like, okay, fine. On top of all of that, fine. Yeah. All right. What's my next question? Because I feel like we could go down this rabbit hole for hours. Let's talk about, for people who want to brew compost tea, what should they know going into it?
Well, there's this link that I will send you on the same thing, that to reduce that we mentioned earlier about the sugars or amendments to the teas, and how to brew it safely.
Okay.
The way that I'm doing it now, and I didn't read, he probably sent it to me as well. I did, is that there are different options aside from molasses as your prebiotic, fish emulsion, kelp, maybe comfrey, and that can be some other test, that somebody else does, that would help make sure that it's safe, that there is not going to be any pathogens coming from your aerated compost tea. In my research, I'm actually going to send out the samples 6 times, I believe 6 times in my I put 6 times, but I don't think that's a year, 6 times in a year,
Okay.
to a lab that makes sure that they're not pathogenic. Now, I don't know how exactly. I'm hopefully FedEx so that they can get it right away. I do have a microscope. I did not take Elaine Ingham's course. There's no way, for me to see if I see any pathogenic bacteria in my microscope. So the home brewer might not have a microscope or, the means to send off their samples. But I just wanted to prove through this research, if you could do it, how often would I see it, a good batch versus not a good batch,
Mhm.
or what would I need to change in order for it to become a good batch? So that's part of the research, is also ensuring that the compost tea that you are using is pathogen free in the first place.
Yeah. And it's such a fine line between doing it wrong and doing it right. I think that scares people off. But if you're doing it, if you learn from the right people and, and are doing it right, your garden benefits. I've seen such an improvement in my soil, and just the ability for my plants to grow and put down deep roots is one thing, but also drainage. We here in California have been hit with these atmospheric rivers, and flooding is happening all over the place. I have no flooding in my backyard because the whole thing is covered in like 4 inches of mulch. And it took 6 months for that change to happen, where the microbes started, started multiplying because they had fungal foods, and we had flooding. We put in a French drain. It did nothing. And then we still had flooding. And then I put the mulch down, and the permeability of my soil, and it digs like butter, and that's microbial life.
Wow.
That's the difference. And compost tea does the same kind of thing for compacted soils, and helps aerate, bring aeration and microbes that tunnel through, everything. I'm speaking in complete layman's terms here because I just
I
don't,
love
I
it.
don't,
Yeah.
I don't like to
What do you
use
do? What do
technical
you use
language.
as your prebiotic? What do you use as your
It's funny because I don't like to use fish hydrolysate because it stinks. And so I use a vegan alternative that is Leonardite based, which is something that it's kind of controversial, because it's not really supposed to help breed any fungal dominance in compost tea. But I have found, I did a study and I posted it somewhere, and I'll have to find that. I sent a picture to a group where I had fresh, it's called Bio Alive or Thrive Alive, I forget. It's from Earth Fort. I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it's supposed to help serve as what fish hydrolysate would be instead. So I use that. I use kelp meal. I use alfalfa meal. I put in a little insect frass also, for the chitinase, for the chitin. And I have other things I'd probably put in there, but it's pretty straightforward, substituting for a vegan alternative instead of using fish hydrolysate. And I don't use molasses.
Yeah.
And do you have a system that you use, a pump that a product that you use that you recommend?
Yes. So I use and I'm not a spokesperson for them, or don't get affiliate, Tea Lab, just because it's simple and I want it. But when I demonstrate this, when I go to the Mother Earth News Fair conferences, it's a bamboo stick with, you can use a bamboo stick where you suspend a pantyhose filled with your compost, and then the air pump from your fish tank, which is about 700 GPH. I think that's the intensity that they.
Okay.
Yes, so it's a small pump. Usually you'll buy it if on Amazon, I believe it's about $30 right now for that pump. But everything else you might already have at home, your 5-gallon bucket, water, water that's from a rain barrel. We also have, we are on a septic and well, and our well water is a little, when we tested it, was very acidic when we came. So we have a neutralizer, but I'm still using rain barrel water just to make sure. And if you're in the cities, you don't want to use the chlorinated water because that might just kill off all the good bacteria.
Exactly. Yeah, I use a Boogie Brew has a hose end filter that eliminates chlorine and chloramine, which are the two big, biological killers in our tap water. So I'll put a link to those things in the show notes. We've already kind of talked about red flags, but what should people be aware of to know if their tea is healthy or not?
Before they spread it in their
Is there anything that they can do?
That the smell, like you mentioned, that's the hard part. That's why you shouldn't use the fish, because then it'll mask all the smell. Like if it smells bad, you know that it's not the right thing. It has to smell earthy, somehow no smell. And then the other thing is, I guess physically, that's one thing that I would look for. Don't let it stay there. Just stay there for a long time after you brew it and you turn off the pot. You want to make sure that you use it right away. So that's something else. It's about the fungal population. But yeah, another thing is the color will be brown, blackish brown. So don't let that worry you. It's not going to be white.
And
nothing else, I guess.
Foam is okay.
Yeah, foam is okay. If you have a pH meter, it should be around the neutral.
7.0 pH.
Yeah, not exactly all the time, but yeah, it shouldn't be less than 6.4, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And I do have a microscope, so I do try and look at my tea under a microscope to make sure it's alive and moving. Because you can, even if you don't know how to identify microbes, you can see pathogens look different, and like, the kind of bacteria that are harmful or pathogens, they have this funky look to them. And if you see motility under the microscope, you've got biologically active microbes in your tea. So that's good. But I know not everyone hardly anyone has a microscope. I'm just on the nerdy side. All right. Well, it's tip time. Do you have a favorite tip you'd like to share with the Garden Nerd audience?
My tip would be the thing that we talked about earlier, where if you see flies on your seedling tray, try spraying them with aerated compost tea and see what happens.
That's a great idea. And, a lot of times people's seedlings, they end up with soil gnats, they come out of the soil and they birth in wet soils. And a lot of times those bags just come with the eggs in them, and there's not much you can do. You'll have to try and experiment and see if compost tea reduces those at all. Have you tried it all already or no?
Well, that's what I'm trying now. So I don't know the results yet.
Okay.
But I do see difference between my different trays. Why do some of them get attacked and not the others? And then I'm thinking that there must be something that I can do about it, because as going back to that plant pyramid that I explained before, as the plant optimizes its metabolism, it becomes more and more immune to the bugs, and the bugs actually die or something bad happens to them when they come near the plant. So that's why you wouldn't see them. And I wonder if that might happen in seedling stage too. So yeah, I'd love for everybody to be a citizen scientist and nerd out about this.
That is exactly what I was just going to say. Citizen science, garden nerds, get on it. It'll be fun. And you can share your results as you go, either on the blog post that goes along with this podcast, or, contact Nikki and let her know what you're doing. It'll be fun. Speaking of which, first of all, thank you for being on the podcast. This has been a scintillating conversation. Where should people go to find you?
Oh, growmyownfood.com is our website, where you can join our Grow It Yourself community. We have a free trial. It's a really lovely, positive, encouraging, inspiring space where you can find other people in your own growing area And we always have a Wednesday watch party. So if you are a garden nerd, we're always studying on Wednesdays, 9 a.m. your time, California, 12 noon Eastern time. We're always going through a certain theme. Like now we're doing Michael David Phillips' Holistic Backyard Orchard, which is all about holistic sprays in the orchard. And then last month we did soil. Every week was a soil, an hour of soil listening to, and then 45 minutes, and then we chat. But aside from that, there's a lot of other cool things in the group going on. So we hope you'll join us there.
And are you on any social media platforms you want to point to?
Yeah, we're permaculture_garden on Instagram, and on Facebook, we're Permaculture Gardens 1. Those are the two places, but growmyownfood.com is where I hang out the most.
All right. Excellent. Well, garden nerds, you got an earful today. I'll be putting links to Nicky's website and all of the things that we talked about this week on Gardenerd.com. We'll also post links to her social media and her online courses and community, so you can check that out. That's it for this week. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. Visit us for tons of free gardening information at Gardenerd.com. Thanks to our sponsor, True Leaf Market, for supporting this episode. And you'll find us on Instagram and Twitter under Gardenerd1, on Facebook as Gardenerd.com, and of course, our Gardenerd YouTube channel. Happy gardening.